So on this bit, we're now going to be thinking about doing our own piece of creative writing, and we're going to pretend that the four options on the slide are the four options that you are being given in an exam paper. So if you remember, you always get given four options. You have to pick one of them, and whichever one you pick, you have to make sure that you are focusing on that task. You can't change the task, you can't even change it a little bit, and you have to make it very clear that you are focusing on that task. So we have got write about a time when you broke the rules. B is a title, The Wedding. C, a memory of primary school. And D, write a story which ends, and that was the worst job of my life. So remember what I said, that you can't change the task. So you couldn't, if you were going to write a story which ends, and that was the worst job of my life, which hopefully some of you have realised that's the student story that we looked at last lesson, the imaginaries. You can't start a story with that was the worst job of my life instead, and then use it as a start task. Whatever task you pick, you have to make sure that you stick to that task, because a lot of the marks are for how well you focus on the task. And make sure as well that when you start your answer, and that will come much later on in the lesson, that you actually are clear about which task you have picked. So you would put, for example, B, the wedding, and then start your story underneath. So the trick with these is first of all to think about, is there anything that has actually happened to you in real life, or a story that you actually know has happened to a friend or a relative or something, family, where you could write about that event. So a time when you broke the rules, doesn't matter how small it is, because you can exaggerate things in your story, but perhaps you, I don't know, you got put in isolation for not wearing the right uniform, and it caused all sorts of upset. And maybe you went to a wedding a couple of years ago, and you had a really good time. Memory of primary school, maybe you were really nervous on your first day of school, or maybe you were really worried about the SATs, or maybe your friend at school wet themselves, or just something. If you've got something in your own personal history, or the personal history of someone you know well, that's always the best thing to write about. Always. Do not take plot lines from films, books, TV shows, or computer games. It is always really obvious, and what you have to remember is other people will have seen the same things as you. Might not be the examiner, but another student somewhere in the country will be doing the same thing. And believe me, it's really easy to spot when something weird is written. I would say my own personal advice, at the end of the day, it would be up to you in an assessment situation, but my personal advice is that I would avoid the D options, because it's very, very difficult to make a last line fit a story in an exam situation. It's very difficult to get to a point where you know you can definitely use that last sentence. And if anything happened, like you ran out of time, and you didn't put the sentence in at the end, you're completely stuffed. And actually, some of you might have picked up about the imaginary story we looked at last lesson. Personally, I felt that ending was the weakest part of it, because he spent the whole story saying about how amazing it was being Charlie's imaginary friend and how sad he was. And then at the end, he said, that's the worst job of my life. And it didn't really feel right. It felt tagged on. So think about that. So what you're going to have to do on the next slide is you're going to have to pick one task, and then you're going to write the task in the box, and you're going to mind map as many ideas as you can. Okay, so make sure you pick one task. A question I always get asked is, oh, can I put two tasks together? Can I do A and B and write about a time when I broke the rules and the wedding? Don't confuse it. Pick one task, make sure you have one task clearly in your title. If in a story about the wedding there happens to be someone breaking a rule, that's up to you, but don't draw attention to it. Don't try and meet two tasks at once, because it's very difficult to write a good realistic story. People think it's easy, but it's actually really, really difficult. And you've got to make sure that you're being sensible about what you do. Okay, so pick one that you would like to do, and then move on to the next task.